In this video, we will show you how to replace your power steering pump on the Chevy Silverado. This will be mounted to the front of your engine. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. Before we can remove the power steering pump, there's several other things that we have to get out of the way first. Let's start along the top of the engine at the engine cover. To remove your engine cover, we're going to take hold of along the front and we'll gently lift it up and then slide it away towards the front of the vehicle on that backside there. Set that aside. Under that area, just alongside of the alternator, you can see the throttle body. We'll disconnect the inlet tube from that throttle body by loosening our clamp. For this, you can use an 8mm or a flathead screwdriver. Now that we've loosened that clamp, let's pause in that position and make our way across the front of the intake tube, and you can see the upper radiator hose. This is held in place right along here. We can separate this with a small prying device. I'm using a trim tool. Now we'll make our way just along the back side of this. You're going to find a hose. For this one, we're going to take hold of this and we'll slide it out of the air intake here. And now we'll make our way back along that air inlet tube towards the upper air filter housing right next to the mass airflow sensor. We'll loosen this clamp. 8mm or flathead for that. Now as we start pulling this away from the throttle body, we want to be careful up along the top. You do have one small locating tab, so we're just going to carefully start lifting up on that. We'll twist this and pull it up and out of position. We'll remove this and set it aside. Now we have clear access to our serpentine belt tensioner. For this, we'll be using a 15mm. We'll be pivoting this clockwise, releasing tension from the belt. Once we have the tension off of the belt system, we can slide the belt off of your idler pulley. As you do this, be extremely careful for any pinch points. Now we can slide the belt off of the alternator and the power steering pump located just below it. Set that aside. Let's pay attention to the power steering pump now. The next thing I like to do is remove the power steering pump pulley from the pump shaft located right here. To do this, you're going to want to have a power steering pump removal tool. Now we can start removing the power steering pump pulley. Looking at the pulley itself, you're going to find that it has a groove. That's for your power steering pump pulley removal tool. Most of these tools are going to come with an adapter that you can use one side or the other. On our application, we're going to be using the side that has the smaller port rather than the larger port. Now for this, you would just want to take one side of that adapter and you're going to slide it right into the groove on that pump. Continuing from here, we need to have our driver. For this driver, it's going to go up against the very tip of the power steering pump shaft and fit into the same groove that we have the power steering pump pulley groove in. Let's get the other adapter on there. Sliding it into the groove just as before. Slide that right on there. Now continuing from here, we're going to be using a 21mm for this center nut, and we'll be using a 16mm for the driver. Continuing on from that, we're going to hold on to the adjustment nut, and we're going to bring the driver all the way up against the power steering pump shaft. We'll be using our 16mm to hold the shaft, and our 21mm. For this, we're going to be turning the 21mm counterclockwise, essentially drawing this entire thing outward, pulling the pulley away from the power steering pump and removing it from the vehicle. I can see this is coming off pretty well. I've got quite a bit of distance here. Now we can remove that power steering pump pulley. We'll remove our tool from it as well. A close inspection, make sure this is not rotted and damaged. A little bit of rust is okay. We'll clean this up and set it aside. Before we continue removing anything else to remove that power steering pump, we can remove the fluid from inside of it. If you have some sort of extraction device, you want to make your way right up here to the power steering reservoir cap. We'll turn this counterclockwise to remove it. Now we can start removing our hardware. I like to start with the rearward mounting bolt. Now for this, it's actually holding a bracket that's attached to that power steering pump reservoir. We want to take the bolt out that's holding the bracket to that engine block. It's a 15 millimeter. Just have to get it to break free. Let's move along the front of the power steering pump. There's 3 mounting bolts holding it to this bracket. In the front area here, you can see one of the mounting bolts we're going to be aiming for. There's a second one moving towards the center of the engine, right up along the top. And then down towards the bottom, just underneath that one, we have our 3rd mounting bolt. As for the first mounting bolt, we're going to remove it and then start it back in just a couple threads. It's a 15 millimeter. Quick inspection. Let's get the other 2. At this point, we're going to leave that last bolt in there a couple threads, and we're going to make our way to the power steering return hose right across here. We want to go ahead and squeeze on this squeezable clamp. We'll slide the hose and the clamp off of the power steering pump line. Now keep in mind there could still be fluid in this area. Have your collection receptacle under here so you can recycle that fluid properly. We'll use some pliers for this clamp. Just give this a wiggle to break it free. Slide it out of place. Now in between the 2 power steering lines, we're just going to take hold of the wiring harness and we'll carefully pull that out of place. You don't want that in between there. Continue on to taking hold of the power steering pump and the last remaining bolt. We'll remove the bolt and then slide the power steering pump out of this position. There we are. We'll lift this up into an area that we can gain access to that power steering pressure line using a 17 millimeter. Turn that counterclockwise. Keep in mind, fluid might make its way out of this as well. Just let that drain into our collection receptacle down there. Now we can get this over to the bench. Now we have our power steering pump and reservoir in the vise holding it steady for us. We'll be paying attention on the back side, removing these 2 mounting nuts so we can remove the mounting bracket from along the back. It's a 15 millimeter. Let's take hold of that bracket. We can remove it from the power steering pump and reservoir. Set that aside. After removing the bracket, we're going to have to swap over the lower mounting stud. Use an 18 millimeter. We'll remove this from the original housing and swap it over to the brand new housing. Go ahead and clean that up, give it a close inspection. Okay friend, let's prepare to install our brand new power steering pump and reservoir. We're going to take this, bring it right down into the vise. Once it's in place, we're going to continue on to removing the lower mounting stud here using our 18 millimeter. Now let's have a quick look at that compared to the original. On the original, you can see that we have this raised lip. That'll make it so the bracket sitting along the back sits flush as it should. Let's get this in place. Start it in by hand, snug it up. Once it's snug, torque that to 37 foot-pounds. Now it's time for our bracket. This can really only go on one way. Just slide it right on there. Install each of your 2 mounting nuts. We'll start them on, snug them up. I'm going to torque these to 25 foot-pounds. While continuing along the back side, we have the area for our pressure line. You can tell we have our protective cap on here. You can use a flathead screwdriver or Phillips head if you want. We're just going to turn this counterclockwise. Continuing on, we have a protective plug for our return hose. Continuing on, we have a protective cover on our power steering pump shaft. Let's get this over to the vehicle. Back in the engine compartment, before installation of the brand new pump and reservoir, we're going to clean the mounting area along the back side of the bracket here. This is where the power steering pump and reservoir would mount to. Just give it a close inspection, make sure it's not cracked or damaged in any way. Continuing on from there, you want to make sure that you clean and inspect both of your lines/hoses. The pressure line should have an O-ring gasket on it. For that, I'm just going to use an angled pick and we'll carefully pull that out of place. There's that gasket. Now we'll just wipe down the line in this area. A close inspection, of course. If it looks like it's rotted or damaged, you need to go ahead and replace that pressure line. This one looks fine. Let's continue on with a brand new O-ring gasket. For these, I typically like to use a little bit of that power steering fluid. It's acting as a lubricant. We'll just slide that right in place. For the return hose, generally you just want to make sure it's still soft and pliable and it's not torn, worn, or damaged in any way. This one looks fine as well. Okay, let's install our brand new pump. We'll take this and start with the pressure line along the back side. For this, we're going to take that pressure line and we're going to go in between the housing and our return line. And now we can start aligning this and starting it in by hand. Once you have it started in, you want to make sure you have the line tight up against the reservoir area here. And now we can snug this up. Once it's bottomed out, we're just going to make sure it's nice and tight here. You do not want a leak coming from the back side of your power steering pump. Now that we have the pressure line tight, let's take this pump and reservoir, get it in position, and start in all the hardware. You need to start it all in before you tighten any of it. All right, there's one. Continue on to the other two along the front, and then we'll also get that one for the bracket along the back side. There's our next one. Third mounting bolts in the front there. And now for the one along the back on the bracket. Now as for tightening these up, we're going to go with the forward 3 first. We'll do the rear, and then we'll torque all of them. Now we'll torque each of these to 37 foot-pounds. Let's continue on down in this area. We're going to take our wiring harness and we'll slide it in between these two power steering lines. You want to have it in between here so there's no way it gets caught on your steering shaft and gets damaged in any way. Continue on to your power steering return line. For this, you want to go ahead and line it up, squeeze on your clamp, and we'll slide it into place. Go ahead and try to tug that off of there. It should not slide off. If it does, your clamp is not functioning properly and you want to replace it. This one feels fine. Now it's going to be time to install the power steering pump pulley. For this, you want to install it using a power steering pump pulley installer. As for that, we're going to take the shaft of it. After we have the pump pulley in place, you want to take this and we'll screw it into the shaft of the power steering pump. Once it bottoms out, you want to take this adapter and we're going to be turning that clockwise, pressing the pulley all the way up against the pump until it's completely level along the front of the power steering shaft. I'll be using a 15mm to hold my bolt stud that leads to the shaft of the power steering pump, and an 18mm on this adapter, driving that power steering pump pulley in. Before we fully remove our tool, let's pull back on the adapter and we'll confirm that we're properly aligned with the very end of the power steering pump shaft here. If the power steering pump pulley is sitting out too far, meaning it's not fully pressed in, your serpentine belt could walk out of position and potentially cause some serious damage. This looks fine. Let's remove our tool. Let's remove our power steering reservoir cap. Continuing from here, let's add some power steering fluid to the reservoir. We're only going to bring it up approximately halfway inside this reservoir area, and then we'll spin the power steering pump pulley. Manufacturer specified fluid here. Remove our funnel. After a few spins on that, we can reinstall our power steering cover for now. Let's install the serpentine belt. For this, we're going to start at the bottom pulley, the crank pulley. Just bring that right around. We're paying attention to the ribs on the belt in comparison to the grooves on each one of the pulleys as we continue. Now, while holding pressure on what would be the passenger side of the belt here, we're going to take the driver's side, bring it underneath the smooth water pump pulley, and around that power steering pump pulley. Once again, we're paying attention to our grooves, ensuring we're properly seated. You can bring that straight up and over the alternator. And now, while holding pressure, we're going to take the back side of that belt and we're going to bring it around the tensioner pulley. From here, we're going to have to make our way back to that tensioner. We'll turn that clockwise, releasing pressure from the belt, and we can slide the belt underneath the smooth idler pulley. Before you remove your tool, give the belt a quick inspection, confirming it's sitting on each one of the pulleys properly. If you're off by even one groove, the belt might come off and can cause damage. Assuming that looks good, you can remove the tool. Let's reinstall the air inlet tube. We're going to bring the rear in along the top of the engine, underneath the cowl area. And now as we make our way along the passenger side of the upper radiator hose, we want to make sure that the inlet makes its way down and on the passenger side of that hose. We can swing this down into the proper position. As we bring it down, you remember that you have one alignment point up along the top of the intake, which will fit into this rubber grommet. And then along the front area here, this will slide onto your throttle body. This can take a little bit of work. Just have to swing it. Lift that. We'll just make sure we're pressing that all the way up against the throttle body so it's completely bottomed out, and tighten your 8mm headed clamp. Give that a quick tug, confirming it's properly secured. Let's follow that all the way over to the upper air filter housing. We're going to have to press this inlet tube into place. Snug it up. Make sure that's nice and tight. We'll make our way underneath the inlet tube. We're going to secure that upper radiator hose into its position. If this clamp had broken, you can use a wire tie, but you definitely want to make sure it's properly secured. We're going to plug this in. Press it until you hear a click. Give it a little tug trying to remove it. It should not slide out of place. It's time for the upper engine cover. For this, if you were to look along the back side of the intake, you're going to find two hooked areas. That's for the back side of the engine cover to slide into. After that, we're going to roll it down into position. There's two mounting points along the top of the intake. We want to align those with the rubber grommets on the bottom of the engine cover. Safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so both wheels are off the ground. After doing that, we're going to put the key in the on position and turn the wheel from one side all the way over to the other side and repeat this process. The power steering rack will help force out any air that might be stuck in the lines or pump. When doing this, if you are looking inside the reservoir, you should be able to see air bubbles making their way up and out and fluid making its way down. Once you've repeated that process several times and you feel as though you've removed as much air as possible, go ahead and start up the vehicle. Let it run for approximately 5, maybe 10 seconds and turn it right back off. Now after doing all that, you want to have your vehicle back on a flat level surface and we'll check that fluid level. When doing that, we're going to use the cap. The cap itself does have a dipstick on it. What we're looking for is right where my thumb is. You can see that it says add and there's a small line. If you were to give this a spin, you can see on the other side it says full and there's another line. We want to be at the full cold line right along here. If we're lower than that, you want to add a little bit. You definitely don't want to be above this because once the engine does get hot and the fluid gets hot as well, the fluid level will rise. We'll latch it in, remove it, and a quick inspection. Now looking right where my thumb is, you can tell that we're at the perfect level. If it is low, go ahead and add a little bit. After that, reinstall your cap. After that, we're just going to inspect the belt one more time since we already ran the vehicle for a short while, confirming it's properly seated. Go ahead and clean your mess, close the hood, and take your vehicle for a road test. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.